record. Okay. Hopefully, like I said, today should be a very short class, so we should not be plus minus 45 minutes, and at best 45 minutes we should be done. The slides we are looking at today is quite small, but what will be happening is that we'll be compensating the timing today. We'll be compensating it for next week. And how do we do that? Because next week we are going to be discussing theories of geopolitics, and it has a whole lot of stuff to discuss. So in as much as we'll finish quite early today, we'll possibly be compensating the time for next week. So I'm already craving your indulgence and seeking permission for that. Next week class may likely be a longer class. So let's get into it. The levels of analysis. So that's what we're discussing today, levels of analysis in geopolitics. Apparently what we mean here is when you look at a particular event or situations that happen around you, I suppose that we all interpret events differently, right? Are we together?
Yes.
I suppose, yeah.
Okay, good. We interpret events differently. It is possible for you to look at a number, let's say number 6. Number 6, you know, you can only call it 6, or better say, let me put it out for us. Let's talk about it. 6 and 9. How do we determine when it is 6 and how do we determine when it is 9? Figure 6.
It's a matter of perspective.
A matter of perspective, right? Okay, a matter of perspective. And what else? What else comes to play in determining if it is 6 or 9?
What we learned.
Huh?
How we learned numbers.
How we learned numbers, yeah? So first we have perspective, which is our ideology, our viewpoint, right? Second, we are talking about learning now. We're talking about the premises of tabula rasa. Have you heard the word tabula rasa before?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so what's the concept of tabula rasa? I'm picking that from the premise of learning.
Making a clean slate.
Huh? You said?
To get even, make a clean slate.
To make a clean slate. Okay, kind of. Are we familiar with the theory around tabula rasa? Is anyone familiar with the theory of tabula rasa? Anyone? Okay, let me just it's the same thing you are saying. I'm just going to link it with an analogy. You said it is what? Clean slate, right?
Yes. That's my understanding of it.
Oh, I'm just speaking to myself. Marcus, are you saying something?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Hold on. Okay, I think I need to increase my own volume. Maybe the stuff is from me here. My volume is high, so I should hear you guys all.
Maybe it's kind of loud.
Huh? Okay, can you say something now again? Let me hear you.
Can you hear me?
Just say anything.
Maybe
and somebody just said, oh, perfect. Okay, yeah, cool. Okay, so, okay. Let me try and use another earpiece and see. Okay. Testing microphone. Can somebody say something?
Better now?
Yeah, I guess so. Okay. I suppose I need to fix my audio here, but I think it's fine now. Okay, so the premise of tabula rasa, we're mixing up all this together. The premise of tabula rasa is the argument that the child comes to the world on a clean slate, just the way you said clean slate now, blank. The child comes to the world blank. He knows nothing, he or she knows nothing, or it knows nothing. And the environment in which you grow up determine who you become. So your knowledge and your perception and everything you think you know is from the premises of the society in which you grow up. By next week, when we are discussing on social constructivism, we'll still talk more on this further. But yes, on the premise of knowledge, when you want to determine 6 and 9, you also come from the premises of knowledge, what you know. For instance, you may be in a society whereby 6 is referred to as 6 and 9 is referred to as 9. And it's possible that 9 may actually be 3. Maybe if we get to investigate knowledge, when we go to epistemology and ontology of knowledge itself, we may come to see that maybe most of the things we believe to be true may not be true. For instance, maybe what we think is white is actually purple. Are you getting the idea? But because we grew up in a society whereby we are told that this is white and this is black, we grew up to believe that this is white and this is black. So the premise is our environment determine who we become, and our perceptions too also determines how we interpret life. And in the premises of the levels of analysis too, we speak of the same thing too in geopolitics to say, if you can come up with some factors, you can actually determine, predict or explain behavior within the international system. Are we together? Are we together, guys?
Yes.
Oh, great. So we said that based on certain characteristics or based on certain features, we can actually predict or explain events in the international system. For instance, you can explain why Brexit, right? You can explain the rationale for Brexit based on certain characteristics. You can explain the position of the United States, for instance, in the fight for COVID. You can explain it based on certain characteristics, on certain levels. So apparently that's what we discuss when we discuss the level of analysis. So in essence, we said there are frameworks for determining the international system. So quickly, let's just move on. Like I said, I don't hope for us to stay too much long in the class. So what do we mean by level of analysis? That's just what I just explained now. And that's what I explained in a whole lot of words there. But it is seen as the framework for explaining the rationale for events in the international arena, right? There are different perspectives that we look at in explaining international arena. And in most cases, they are a form of generalization. We can say for instance, there's a sexist perception that I used to have, that beautiful ladies are unintelligent. Are you getting that? A beautiful lady is almost always unintelligent. Are you getting the idea? So if I want to use that now, I can, based on logic, say that any lady that is beautiful is not intelligent. Are you getting that? So that's a generalization. And in most cases, our generalization may not be correct sometimes, and sometimes they may be correct. But it is this generalization that we come up with a theory, and that particular theory is going to be used to explain certain events and the likes. And so we said there are forms of generalization that helps us understand complex situations in world politics. That is levels of analysis. And in simple terms, we can say they are the why of international politics. Everything I just explained now is on the premise of the why, right? You want to explain events and you also want to predict events. So we can say Marcus will behave like this, or Marcus behaved like this because of A, B, and C. So basically, that's the argument we do when we talk about the levels of analysis. And when we discuss the levels of analysis, apparently we have 4 levels of analysis we use in international to explain international events. In geopolitics, we have 4 levels of analysis. First, we start with the individual level, which is the baseline. Yeah, it's the baseline for analysis. So we'll talk about the individual level of analysis. We'll talk about the state level of analysis. We'll talk about the systemic or regional level of analysis, and then we'll talk about the global or international level of analysis. And please take note, like I said, it's important for us to note that there is no single correct level for a given question. Just the way I said that it's a generalization. The example I just gave now, the sexist example I gave now, to say every beautiful ladies are all intelligent. So by that generalization, the assumption is that any lady that is beautiful will definitely be all intelligent. But you know, sometimes it may not be true, right? So we may not use just a single analysis. Sometimes you may want to explain a particular event from an individual premise. In this place of saying beautiful ladies are all intelligent, I'm looking at it from an individual space. I'm looking at it from a physical space. But it's possible that we know that is not true. There are beautiful ladies that are very, very intelligent. And we also have ugly ladies, the ones that are very ugly, that are also unintelligent, right? And it goes both ways. So the argument we make here is that just the way we have the 4 levels in which we can explain international events, sometimes these levels are you cannot just use a single one. Sometimes you have to use maybe 2 or 3. And sometimes your analysis from an individual level may be wrong, right? And sometimes it may not be wrong, but that is the level in which, that's the explanation in which you use to predict a particular event. So sometimes when you want to explain a particular event, you may look at it both from the state level as well as the individual level. Or you may be looking at it from the regional level and the state level, on and on. So there are times in which you need to have multiple levels for you to actually explain a particular event. So when we talk about the individual level of analysis, we are talking about explaining international events from the characteristics of the leaders, their personality, their belief system, their worldviews, their values, and their roles within the international events. Apparently here, the argument from the individual level gives prominence, gives a large level of importance to the individual leader. The argument here is that individuals determine history. That's why we have the great man theory of history, that it is individuals that determine the course of history. History do not happen in itself. We go back to the premise of tabula rasa and the issue of social constructivism, right? Or we explain social constructivism proper next week. So the premise is that every event that has happened in the international system or historically, the world is where it is now as a result of individual decisions, the characteristic of that particular individual. So for instance, if you have a particular leader that is aggressive, the argument of the individual level of analysis is that the states will behave aggressively. Why? Because the individual leader has a personality that is aggressive. When you have an individual, the leader that have a belief system that is conservative, you assume that the state will carry out conservative principle. If you have a leader that is a radical, right, the state will carry out radical principle. Remember last week when we were talking about which polar system is better in the world, whether we want a multipolar system, a bipolar system, or a unipolar system. Remember, we argued that in a multipolar system, if you have a situation whereby a leader, you have a leader that's is aggressive and the likes, war can start at any point. You see, that depends on the personality of that particular leader. That's the premise of the individual level of analysis. To say that events in the international system is determined mostly by the perception of that person. So if the person have a belief system whereby, for instance, if I have asked in the class, for instance, what is your position on the issue of abortion? What's your position on the issue of abortion? It's possible that we have people here that are pro-life, right? Some people may believe that the life of the mother is the most important. So abortion is fine. If you have a Christian background, you may believe that no, the fetus is also alive. So by going to do abortion, it implies that you have killed a life, right? So you see, that determines how you behave. So if you become a leader, the kind of policies in which you will pursue, your belief system will follow within that line. It will influence the policies in which you carry out. And the policies in which you carry out also determines the way the state will go by. So basically, that's the argument of the individual level of analysis. So in summary, it talks about the characteristics of the leader in terms of his personality, in terms of his belief system and his worldview. It determines what he does in the international system. A perfect example, let's say in Europe now, Boris Johnson's personality has a lot to do with how the British, the United Kingdom foreign policy is going on now. Donald Trump's personality has a lot to do with the foreign policy positions of the United States, right? And it goes on and on like that. You can come up with a whole lot of examples and the likes. The leadership in Germany, the leadership in Italy, the leadership in France, the leadership in the entirety of the European Union, in Africa, in Asia. There are levels of the policies in which they carry out that are determined by at this level. So like I said, it speaks to the premise of the great man theory of history. And in the great man theory of history, we talk about the issue of the world wars, for instance. The argument is that if, for instance, Adolf Hitler was never born, the great man theory of history, we argue that maybe the Second World War wouldn't have happened, right? If Adolf Hitler was never born. And maybe even if the Second World War happened, if, let's say, Winston Churchill was never born, or Stalin in Russia was never born, then we possibly wouldn't have had the victory of the Allied powers, right? Maybe Germany will have won the war, right? So you see, these are the arguments you make, and you know that these events, this event in the international system, or this historical event, has influenced the way the world itself is presently. So we say that is at the individual level of analysis. So in summary, please get this, that the characteristics of that particular leader determines what happens in the international system. So that's at the individual level of analysis. And then so all these arguments here is what I just explained in that space. If you look at, say, Gorbachev, if Gorbachev was never born, for instance, possibly the USSR would have collapsed in 1989. Possibly we still have the Cold War still going on. Possibly the United States and USSR will still have been in tug of war. Now we are having a shift. You know, we're talking about new Cold War now between China and the United States. Maybe the Cold War between China and the United States wouldn't have even come to existence if Gorbachev was never born, something like that. So these are some of the arguments we make around the great man theory of history. right? And if you look at the 1963 Cuban Missile Crisis, possibly if we did not have people like Nixon, possibly maybe the Cuban Missile Crisis would have been the Third World War. That would have been the Third World War in 1963, but that was averted. So these are points in which we look at when we look at the individual level of analysis. And then when we talk about the state level of analysis, you can pick up again to say it also talk about the characteristics of the states, determining its behavior within the international system. So what are the characteristics of a state? What makes up that particular state? Is the state a democratic country? Is it an authoritarian country? Is it a capitalist country? Is it a socialist country? What is the political culture within that particular space? That determines the actions as well as the inactions of that particular state in the international system. For instance, are you guys familiar with the democratic peace theory? Have you heard that before?
No.
No.
Okay. Okay, so the argument of the democratic peace theory, in some, you can read more on that maybe after the class, but I'll just give you a snapshot of what it argues. The argument of the democratic peace theory is to say that countries that are democratic countries hardly go to war. They don't go to war with themselves. Are you getting me? So countries that are democratic don't go to war. They don't go to war with themselves, right? So you see democratic countries, you start picking up almost all the countries in Europe, the United States, Australia, most countries in Africa and the likes. They don't go to war. So that's the argument of the democratic peace theory. So the argument is to say that because those countries are democratic, they in most cases believe in dialogue. They dialogue, they negotiate their way, right? So when there's a conflict, they don't go to war over any conflict. They talk about it. There's always a peace that exists within democratic countries. So that's basically the argument of the democratic peace theory, right? So, and then you see a country that is democratic in most cases now, if we want to go by the premise of the democratic peace theory, we will assume that no matter what, they will not go with war with themselves. So it is very difficult for you to have a situation whereby Germany will be in war with the United Kingdom. Are we together? Or Germany is in war with France. Or Germany is in war with the United States. Because the argument is that both countries are democratic countries. So they would rather go for negotiation than go for war. That's the argument of the democratic peace theory. So you realize that you can use that as an explanation to say, to explain why these countries don't go to war, right? That is on what? On the state level of analysis. So we look at the characteristics of the state within that space, right? So when you look at another, like let's say an authoritarian state, let's say North Korea, you know that because of the structure of North Korea is an autocratic state, right? With Jinping as the leader there. You know that anything can happen. They are prone to war because what? They are an authoritarian state. It's autocratic, right? The premise of because of that, they can go to war at any point, right? So that's the argument there. The argument of the democratic peace theory is just like the opposite of what authoritarianism talks about. So because that country is authoritarian, the leadership in that country is used to having their way. You know, in democracy, you may not have your way. In democracy, we talk about the premises of majority having their way and minority having their say. So you have the right to say what you want to say, but you may not have your way because majority will always have their way. So you, as a leader, you need to always align yourself with the majority, right? But in an autocratic space, you don't need to align yourself with anybody. If you decide what happens, that is what it becomes, right? So that itself also determines how the state will behave in the international system, because the state will always want to enforce its rights. And a bit to enforce your right, if you enforce your right, and I enforce my rights, what happens? We're going to have war. We're going to have conflict. So that's the argument there. The economy of the state, the economic system of that particular state also determine how it behaves within the international system. Not only the economic system alone, the economic status of that state. If the state is an economically rich country, it determines how it behaves. Even as individuals, if you have money, if you are rich, is the way a rich person behave is definitely different from the way a poor person will behave. And that's how a country also operates. That's how the states also operates. Rich countries have different behavior as compared to what? Poor countries. And I will talk about political culture. Political culture is the political way of life of the people. Are the people active when it comes to politics of the state, or are they passive? Are they nonchalant about the politics of the state? So the way the political culture is also determine how the states behave. Their cultural identity to also have a place. Geopolitics of the state also have a place in the behavior of the state. What do we imply when we talk about the geopolitics of the state? We're talking about the location of that particular state. For instance, a country that is located in Europe will behave differently in its relations with its neighbors as compared to how you behave with another country, say located in North America or South America or in Africa, right? A perfect example that you can relate with, for instance, the way France behave with Germany, considering the proximity of France and Germany, will be different from the way Germany will behave with South Africa. Also on the premise of what? Proximity. So that's the premise of geopolitics we talk about. The territory of the country, the location in which the country is, determines its politics. It determines its behavior. And then we talk about cultural identity too, all right? We're talking about how they identify with themselves, how they see themselves, right? How do you see yourself? How do the state see itself? It also determines its behavior within the international system. And then we also talk about the interest group and public opinion within that particular space, right? The interest group and public opinion within that particular place also determines the way the state behave. How active are the interest groups in that particular place? How active are they? They determine how the states also behave within the international system. So yeah, so please take note of this. So the characteristics of the states also determine its behavior in the international system. So we move on to the systemic level of analysis. So under the systemic level of analysis, this is concerned about the influence of the global system on the outcomes of individual states. How do the global system itself influence individual states, right? In this space, we say that the foreign policy of state, that the behavior of state, is determined by the external reaction of the environment. In that place, we are talking about how other states behave, how people around you behave, determine how you also behave. And this premise first talk about the structural and realists. For the structural realists, they believe that the international system can be seen from two spaces. They believe that the international system is anarchic, right? And they also believe that in the premises of the distribution of power within the international system. What do you mean by the anarchic nature of the international system? The argument is that because each state is sovereign, each state is independent of its own, there is no government within the international system. There's no government within the international system. So everybody is on his own. So because everybody's on his own, there is no world government and there's no world policing system that determines what happens in the international system. So for that reason, realists believe that the international system is anarchy. It's based on anarchy. So it's anarchic. It's a state whereby everybody decides what it wants to do at any time and within the space of its power, right? So that's the argument within the international system. So you see, because the international system is anarchic, everybody lives on mutual suspicion. And that determines the behavior of states in the international system. And then they talk about the distribution of power. How power is distributed in the international system also determines how states behave. We spoke about this last week and upper week. The distribution of power within the international system, polarity, right? How is power distributed? Who has power? How can power be redistributed? We'll talk about the balancing of power, right? So it also determines how states behave in the international system. So how South Africa will react in the national system will be determinant on the level of power it carries. How France, Germany, and the likes will behave in the international system will also be determined by the level of power it carries. So basically, these are the arguments of the that's the argument from the system. So that's how we behave in the international system. Are you with me? That's how we behave in the international system. That it's the distribution of power within the international system determine how states also behave in the international system. So you can explain events based on the systemic level. Are you guys with me?
Sure.
Yes.
Uh-huh. Okay. I hope I'm not too fast.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you. So that's the argument here, that you see you can explain how states behave based on this. The fact that there's the anarchic nature in the international system, as well as the distribution of power within the international system. And within this the systemic level, there are two levels, levels in which it is divided into. It's divided into two types. The systemic level is divided into two types. We talk about process, and then we talk about structure. Talk about process, and then you talk about structure. And then process explain the relationship of states with other states. How do they see themselves? Go back to the realist premise of international anarchy, right? Remember I said under international anarchy, each state is sovereign. So there is no world government. So because there's no world government, people behave in whatever way they want to. There's no world government, there's no world police that hold people to action. So under the systemic level, when you talk about process, you're talking about the relationship of states with one another. So now you look at issues like security dilemma, right? Because you know that each state will want to protect its own interests, right? You now need to ask yourself, as a state, what do you do? Do you protect yourself or do you help others, right? So that's the premise of security dilemma there. And then talk about alliance politics. In that space, you need to form alliance within the international system. Who is your friend? And in politics, we believe in the argument that there's no permanent friends and there's no permanent enemy. So you don't have permanent friend or permanent enemy. So today, you may be my friend, but tomorrow you'll be my enemy. Why? Because our interests changes, interests change. So if my interests and your interests aligns today, we become friends. But when my interests and your interests do not align, we immediately become enemies, right? So that's the issue. That's what we talk about alliance politics there, right? And then talk about diplomacy. We talk about the premise of social construction of identity and the likes. So today we are friends, we see ourselves as friends. Tomorrow we see ourselves as enemies. And then there's a different construction of our identity. So on that process, we talk about the relationship in which states have with one another. And this relationship, you can use it to explain international events. And then the other space is what? Structure, right? Under structure, we talk about the position of states to other states. That's why we talk about anarchy, we talk about the distribution of power, we talk about international institutions like the UN and the likes. So basically, this is what you look at when you look at the systemic level of analysis. So you are looking at it from the premise of the process, which is the relationship they have with one another, relationship which states have with one another, or you want to look at it from the premise of structure, which is the position in relation to one another. What's the position of states in relation to the other? So that's what we look at when we look at the systemic level of analysis. And the final level of analysis in which we look at is the global level of analysis. So in the global level of analysis, you are concerned about explaining international outcomes that transcend just states. So you see, well, in the whole argument we have been coming with now, from individual level of analysis to the state level of analysis to the systemic level of analysis, at that space, you are still trying to look at states and the territory of states and how states will behave within this territory. That's what you are looking at these three levels. But at the global level of analysis, you are looking at events that transcend national borders, that its outcome transcend just a single state. So that's what we want to look at this level. So you look at the evolution of technology and human relation, right, in relation to the environment. So you start talking about issues around climate change, right? How do we address climate change? How do we address global warming? How do we address pandemics like the COVID we're having now? Like the issue of the swine flu, the Spanish flu, the Black Death. How do you address all these things? And how do you explain all these things within the premise of the international arena, right? So this is what you start looking at the global level of analysis, right? So you focus on issues that have a global perspective. You look at the issues around the North-South divide and the likes. So basically, these arguments we make, this is what we look at when we look at the global level of analysis. Events that transcend a national border, that has a global reach, that influence, that it has lingering effects on the world over time. You talk about European imperialism, the issue of colonialism around the world and the likes, the conquest of the world by Europe and all that. So you know that the conquest of the world by Europe has influenced the history of the world, and it has influenced the configuration of the world as it is now. So basically, these are the arguments in which you look at when you look at this level of analysis. Okay? So I go back here now. Summarily, we said we have 4 levels of analysis. We have individual, we have states, systemic, and the global. And like I said, none of these, in most cases, can actually explain events on its own. Sometimes you have to mix more than one and to explain a particular international event. So I'll leave it here and open the floor for question or contribution, if there are any.
Not at the moment for me.
Okay. Anybody? Question or contribution, or if there's a space in which you feel maybe you need better clarity and you need me to possibly explain.
Not at the moment.
Anybody? Vincent, you're about saying something?
I just said not right now.
Okay. Ivy, Linda, Ranja. Anything? Okay. So I should then ask then, if you have nothing. 2 things I want to address before we leave for today. And everything we've covered so far, do you have any challenge with anything we've covered so far? Not just this topic today, maybe from the stuff we have covered in the past 2 weeks. This is our 3rd week together now.
Can you repeat the question again, please?
From all what we have covered so far,
yeah,
and the course of the semester, the course of the 3 weeks we've been together. If there's any observation you want to raise, if there's something you think you want me to do better, or if there's a question that's bothering your mind in relation to the topics we have covered so far that you want us to quickly address, you can address that in the next, say, 5-10 minutes. Anything?
Thinking about it. Nothing comes to my mind, at least for now. I have to think about it for longer, but I think it's fine for me.
Any other? Or should I just assume that is the general opinion? I don't want to take that as a general opinion. At least I want 1 or 2 persons to tell me nothing for now, and then we move on.
I want to add that I really liked a short discussion in the last week about the lesser evil. It was quite interesting for me. In general, I think the lesson is good and we are all able to follow.
Back to be sure that I'm just not pushing and possibly speaking to myself. You know, when you talk within this space, because I know what I am saying, I'll just assume you know what I'm saying, and I'll just keep carry on. So it's very important that we clear up on that. And then another thing is, I'm going to write my email now. If you can pick it up in the discussion session, sorry, in the chat section, I'm going to put my email there. My email is ociap@dut.ac.za. I'm going to put it there. I will appreciate if you can all send me your emails, because ideally I should send you the slides so that if you possibly want to read through the slides and all that, or get the videos. But because I don't have your email address, it's difficult for me to send these things to you. But that will be up for if you are interested in getting the slides that we use for the lecture. If you're interested in getting the slide, you just send me an email, then I can forward the slides to you, right? And then
that's a great idea.
You say something?
That's a great idea, I said. That we can
Because I
have a
don't
look
have
at the slides once again.
I don't have your email address. I have information I was sent, but I don't have your email address with the information that was sent to me. So I'm just going to drop my email. You can send me emails, and then I can forward you the slide. So at least every week after the lecture, I should be able to send you the slide so that you can also read through the slide. And if there are questions, you can bring them up in class, and then we can address them, right? Okay. So let me drop my email in the chat section now. Okay. So I'm dropping my email there too. So you can as well drop your emails there. Preferably you can just drop your email in the chat section. I suppose that I should be able to get them from there since I'm recording, and then I can send you the slide. So I will send you the slide from week 1 to week 3, and then every week I can also send the slides out.
Sounds
right?
good.
Okay, so that's it. That's the class. If we don't have any question or contribution or anything that we need to address, we just meet again next week same time. Right?
Right. Thanks for the lesson and take care.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks, till then.
Bye.
Bye.